Welcome to Deal Talk. Today, you're going to meet Suzanne, Janasz, and you're going to get actionable tips to negotiate faster and smarter. Our goal from today's conversation is to help you negotiate your future. That's what we're going to be talking about. And when you do that, we are hopeful and optimistic that you will ignite change in your life and also in the lives of those around you. My name is Shane. I am the founder of Mediation Table, where we're working to cut conflicts from months to minutes and learning and doing and using all the wonderful things of AI. I'm also a mediator, graduate of the Harvard program on negotiation, but most importantly, I am your host. And Suzanne is a learning executive, a professor, a thought leader, a world traveler, an author, a consultant, and she has studied extensively on what it means to negotiate your future. So Suzanne, welcome to Deal Talk. Tell us, what is your number one actual negotiation tip to get us started?
Sure. I'm going to answer the question probably differently than some, because you'd say, okay, let's prepare, right? Be prepared, know what you want, exactly, et cetera, et cetera. My number one tip is to be more mindful of opportunities to negotiate. So in other words, lots and lots of times we experience conflict. We don't get the fairest deal. I have a number of examples that I'll share if we have the time, but to just recognize these opportunities to negotiate, then to decide whether it's worth it. Because let's face it, I'll give you a quick example to this short question. I don't know why it is, because I know in my brain it makes no sense, but I'll still drive an extra mile to save 3 cents a gallon. I don't know why, just don't, but I do. Similarly, if you are offered the opportunity to save money on a purchase, is it worth it? Because for some, as you know, conflict is uncomfortable. So is it worth it? So identify those opportunities, evaluate, decide whether it's worth it, and then prepare. And there's a lot more we could talk about that would be that tip of the week, so to speak. But I think just negotiating more is my tip.
I love that tip. And it reminds me of negotiation training with Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference. He said in the training, the most dangerous negotiations are the ones you don't know you're in. So being mindful of opportunities is next level. It's next level, because when you know that there's an opportunity, then you can execute. But you can't execute if there isn't an opportunity necessarily. So I love that take. And I'm also really fascinated, and I know the audience listening, when it comes to negotiating your future, is really fascinating too. Can you define for us what negotiating your future is, and then share maybe 2 or 3 simple everyday examples of how someone can apply it as well?
Sure. And I will say that this is something that, as a professor for more than 20 years, there's lots of great books and textbooks out there. And this is a topic that hasn't been covered in my, based on my look, right? And so the idea of looking forward, so not just about negotiating your salary or more specifically, negotiating your compensation package, but what happens when you're in that great job and something comes up? Let's say you have an opportunity to spend 6 months in some beautiful location, but your company doesn't have a remote working from home policy. How can you negotiate that opportunity and ensure that your boss and your coworkers have access to you and they don't feel somehow slighted? Or, for example, things are humming along with you and your partner, and you decide to get an MBA, like you, Shane, right? Well, as you found out firsthand, that takes a lot of time, a lot of focus, and it takes away the fun stuff, right? You're no longer out partying, pub crawling, etc. Well, your partner may not have signed up for that, right? So they're thinking that you're going to be home and hanging out with them. You're going to be going on vacations. You're going to be, shooting the breeze, when you've got to study and you've got a team project and you've got these things to prepare for. How do you negotiate expectations, especially changing expectations with your partner, so that that fight doesn't happen? How do you nip that in the bud, even from the time you start applying for those programs? And the last quick example I'll mention, and we can kind of drill down in these if you want, go back to the MBA for a moment. I can't tell you how many times I've had MBA students in my night classes come late and say, gee, Dr. D, I'm really sorry. My boss kept me because this project's due tomorrow. And I
Yeah.
said, is this the same boss who said, hey, Shane, go get an MBA, we'll pay for it? Yeah, why? Shaking my head, right? So, like, how can you get in front of these kinds of conflicts and issues and negotiate your future to have a smoother, it's never going to be smooth, but to have a smoother path? Make sense?
Yeah. A thousand percent. And let's get into yeah, it's so interesting that, and I love the second point that you made about just communication and like that whole journey of selecting an MBA. It was a huge learning lesson for me because I actually made the mistake of like not really communicating with Rachel very well my intentions or where I was going. And then obviously when the time came to make a decision, she was like, whoa, 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 like what's going on? Why can't you just do it here? And she had every single right to say that. And it was a, there are probably so many reasons why we forget to communicate. It could be excitement. It could, where it's unintended, or, maybe there are other blockers or other things. But let's talk about like, I feel like there's not enough out there about these boundary settings and these expectations. Can using that third example of the student being late for the boss who approved them to get an MBA, which is quite I love that example. Wow, you really know how to make these relevant to my current life. I appreciate that. Not everyone always does that. Like, so what do you say if you're the student who's has that pressure? Like, can we talk about what to actually say?
Sure, would love to. I think, first of all, again, I'm all about expectation setting early and often, right? It's not enough to start having that conversation the first time the conflict appears, because you really haven't given the other person or persons, like your coworkers, a chance to process and think about, well, what will we do if and when? So in that case, with the boss, this is great. I just want to be clear. Classes run from 6:30 to 10 every Wednesday night. This semester, next semester, it'll be different. What do we have on? What are some things that, looking at the calendar that you foresee that might be a conflict if we have a big show or a big, deadline? What are those things that I can get out in front of and possibly even have somebody in the XYZ office come in and do that? Because I know me, when I get into a program like this, and I'm kind of a high need for achievement person, I'm going to be super focused and I want to do my best in the program. And also I want to do my best for the company. So let's get out ahead. Here's the schedule. Next week is a fall break. We don't have to worry about that week, but just to kind of like sit down person to person and say, here's what the demands look like. And I've talked to others in the program. It's pretty demanding, nights, weekends, etc. And so I'm committed, and I know you are. How can we kind of get out ahead of potential conflicts in the future?
Yeah, and it even reminds me too of there are documents or even folks, let's say two entrepreneurs who are starting a company, they will write in their operating agreement how they will solve the conflict when it comes up. Because what you're talking about, I love that you're setting expectations up front with your class in this scenario, because you mentioned conflict a moment ago being a bit uncomfortable. And I feel like for a lot of people, that is the case for sure. And this idea of communicating your needs up front, or at least having a plan of like, all right, if when it's not if, it's like when a conflict happens, like what are we going to do? Are we going to agree to meet on a Zoom, or if you're remote, or are you going to agree to listen to the other side for 10 minutes and then they'll listen to you for 10 minutes? Like I just imagine like getting ahead. This is it feels kind of like emotional intelligence 2.0. It's like the next level. And I imagine that's why people go and take your classes, is because they want to level up these skills, right? These skills are hard.
The skills are hard, and let's be honest, Shane, 3 plus 4 almost years of remote work from home, and those skills have dulled. And I'm being kind. I'm using dulled as a gentle way of saying
Please.
really, really not only slowed, in some cases reversed. I'm working on a piece on that, in fact, right now. Um, Going back, for example, to the with a boss or with a partner or something like that, you know, I think one of the reasons why the person going off and getting an MBA, for example, don't necessarily communicate is because in their minds, this is an investment in our future, honey. When I get this degree, we're going to have way more opportunities, way more financial freedom, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I don't need to sell you on this, but you do. You do, because what is valuable to one person isn't necessarily valuable to the other. Your partner might want more time, more relaxation, more vacations, right? I mean, I've been with, different friends and loved ones in my life, and you can't assume that they want what you want. So having the conversation and then finding where those overlaps might be in your interests is, again, a great practice to engage in early and often.
Yeah, and what are some of the questions that you ask when you're engaging early and often? Like, yeah, what do you ask? What do you
So, again, let's take the example of the MBA. Let's say the two of you met in college and you're like, well, obviously we're both very pro education. We care about learning and improving our capabilities and our um, worth on the market. Here's the thing. I know, because I've talked to other people in the program, that the program can be very demanding, nights and weekends, etc. How are you going to feel if we don't have our usual Friday night date? What's going to be an important compromise if we don't have that, that's going to make you feel like I'm still present, although pulling back just temporarily for the 2 years that this program exists? What would be a perfect solution for you? So to kind of like, what is it that you want? What would you like, that is reasonable? But knowing that your time is limited, how can I make it up to you? What are some things we can do? And I'll give you an example. I am a workaholic, and I've been out on my vacations with my partner. And soon as I pull out my computer, he kind of looks at me like, what planet are you from? And I'm like, well, I just got a couple of things, blah, blah, blah. And he would get a little upset. And so finally I said, well, how about this? What if, because he works too, I said, what if we earmark 1 hour, let's say 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Anything and everything we get done in that hour, computers closed, phones off, and then we can rest and we can enjoy the day. Now, in some cultures, that's anathema, right? That's just like, nope, vacation is vacation, no work whatsoever. I wish I could get there. That's just not who I am. But if I get that 1 hour in the morning, that kind of like takes that stress out of my head, knowing that I've taken care of those things and now I can focus on vacationing, whatever that is.
Yeah, and it's like a level of self-awareness that you have to get to that point. And so just as much as asking questions like you mentioned, those are some great examples. It's also knowing as well what you want. And that's part of what negotiating for your future is. But what do you say to the person who maybe, they know the questions that they want to ask, they've practiced negotiating, they've taken maybe a training or two in the past, but they're like, well, I don't really think I can negotiate for my future, or like, I don't really know like what I want to happen. Like, do you have any advice for those people who are maybe a bit hesitant to this idea of negotiating your future?
Well, again, the phrase negotiating your future is huge, right? How many of us don't really know what we want to be when we grow up at any age, right? Or the number of times I've had students in my office who said, oh yeah, I'm an accounting major. Really? So you like accounting? No, but my parents said they wouldn't pay for my degree unless it was something. Oh yeah, you've not heard that before? Oh my
Brutal.
God.
That's brutal.
It is brutal. And so I'm like, well, I, I don't approve of that parenting style, but that's another story for another podcast. But the idea behind that is, how can you, could you, if you have to do that, which I don't believe is true, because I think ultimately parents want their children to be happy. And, happy is more than financial security, certainly. Or maybe it's the parents worrying about funding them for the rest of their lives. I don't know. But this idea of, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, is is real, right? In a world that the nature of the jobs, you have some specialty there in AI. 10 years ago, we didn't talk about AI. 15 years ago, there was no such job as UX designer. That didn't exist. And so the rate of change is so rapid that one of the things that I often recommend, and it also leans into my research on mentoring, is to connect with people, and LinkedIn is a fabulous platform to do that, and to say, hey, Shane, I noticed that you work in X and we have a common friend in Sam. I wonder if you'd let me pick your brain for 20 minutes sometime in the next few weeks. I'm really interested in what you do, and I'd love to learn firsthand a little bit more what a day in the life of a UX designer looks like. And I have required my students to do this kind of online mentoring assignment in my classes for decades, actually. And it's super, super helpful in kind of just breathing life into, what does it mean to be a UX designer? What does it mean to be an IT consultant? Even those names don't really give a sense of what a day in the life or a week in the life looks like. And so that kind of informational interviewing, not asking for a job, is a good way to get a handle on, well, could I see myself in this role? And if so, where? And if not, what else would have to happen, or what additional training or degrees would I need to get along the way? So to negotiate your future kind of necessitates knowing what that future state looks like.
Yeah, and that requires work too. It makes me think about from a negotiation lens as well, building on what you shared, is this idea of creating options in negotiations takes work too. Like having conversations with multiple people, getting different perspectives, because you might meet with two folks who work in IT, but one of the CTOs might have a lens or a background in finance, and then the other CTO might have a lens of engineering, and they're doing this same role, maybe at similar companies, but how they approach their work is going to be wildly different. But that can inform you how you work, how you process information, and ultimately like what you decide. So it's almost like negotiating your future is, there's an element of it that is about gathering information.
For sure. And to your point, when I think about, again, those poor students who come in my office and say, yeah, accounting because my parents think it's a solid career choice, I think as children, we start out in this asymmetric power situation, right? Your mom and dad, or your mom and mom, or whatever, tell you what to do and what not to do. And so, as long as you want smooth sailing in your childhood, you don't push back. And so then this kid comes to college at 18 years old, and all right, well, I'll just keep doing what mom and dad told me to do. Well, where do they find their happiness? Where do they find their joy? Where do they find what they're good at, not just, and what they like to do, not just what is a solid, stable career. So you're absolutely right. When a parent does that to a child, for a child to say, I like the idea. How about this? What if I double major in accounting and music? By the way, I have an undergraduate degree in music. So there's got to be some preparation, as you said, ahead of time. What are some possibilities? What would that look like? And how can I get your buy-in if you're footing the bill, or in the case of the boss, how can I get your buy-in to leave me alone when I'm about to leave to go to class, so that we're both able to manage in this environment?
Yeah, it reminds me too of Porter's Five Forces. I imagine maybe you've covered it in your classes, or maybe haven't. It came up the several times the last couple of weeks, of like managing stakeholders. In this context at AU, they have a really strong sustainability program. So it was like, how do you manage stakeholders where situations are tense? As it relates to like sustainability and reporting, and it's so interesting. And you mentioned that you speak to a lot of students, you work with a lot of students, and I imagine as you're doing that, you're also talking with employers or staying up to date of like what's needed in the world. It's like, for someone who wants to advance their career, they want to shape their future, what are some skills that you feel they should have that maybe not a lot of people have right now?
Well, you said it earlier, EQ. I would say, the thing is, you can teach anyone how to read a balance sheet. You can teach anyone how to program an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, honestly, these technical skills are not only learnable, but they're always changing, right? Like, what is the platform? I remember when Slack came out, I'm like, wait, what's that? Right? So things are changing technically, but I think the kind of the glue that holds it all together, or better, the grease that skids the gears of working together, is interpersonal skills. And whether it's emotional intelligence, self-awareness, the ability to resolve conflicts, to work effectively on a team, to persuade, right? What we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years is flatter and flatter organizations with greater spans of control. So more often than not, you're not going to be the boss at 22, 23 years old. So the only way to get things done is to have skills of persuasion and influence. And so again, these are learnable skills. And for students to start thinking about, you're not going to graduate and be the CEO next week. It doesn't happen unless you're founding your own company. So to not pay short shrift to interpersonal skills. Actually, I have a very quick story. So early in my professor career, I was not only teaching an interpersonal skills course that was required of all undergraduate business students, I was also the course head. So I was herding cats. I mean, supervising other PhDs who were teaching the course, because we taught some 1,000 students every year.
There's a lot.
And yeah, great. I mean, I think it was very ahead of their time to have done this program. This is 20 years ago. I had the director of undergraduate studies come to me and say, "Hey, Suzanne, I have this student who missed taking the interpersonal skills course as a prerequisite, but he's lobbying to take it as a co-requisite within, the other courses he's taking." And I said, okay, why is he so special? And he's like, "Well, he's a double major in economics and finance, and he's an A student." I'm like, okay, I'm not convinced, but he's like, "Well, why don't you meet with him?" So I meet with this student one-on-one, and Shane, this kid had the interpersonal skills of a doorknob. And I'm like, no names. I'm not mentioning any names. This is a long time ago. But I think that's still in this day and age, whether you call them soft skills or people skills, they are not as valued as they should be. They're, again, short shrift, like, well, but look at this guy. They can, run circles around a spreadsheet. That's fine. But you have to talk to your colleagues. You have to talk to your stakeholders. You have to talk to your customers, your clients, your vendors. If you're not able to listen and engage and build on other people's ideas and foresee conflicts and manage them, you're going to be more trouble than value add in an organization.
Yeah, it's true. I was doing a little bit of digging: communication, leadership, teamwork, creativity, adaptability, problem solving. So interpersonal skills, like you just mentioned there at the end, like listening for, listening for, like, what would you say? Listening for challenges, listening for opportunities and meetings where, listening for, I'm thinking about this summer, like listening for constraints. But then also connecting those constraints or those missing components with the knowledge, the time you've put in researching about other topics. So it's
And
like, yeah, it's interesting, right?
well, and I'll add one thing which you didn't say, and I think it's sometimes, especially in the heat of conflict, listening for empathy, right? When the other person's upset, what do we normally do? "Shane, you got it all mixed up. Let me tell you again why my idea is superior to yours,"
Mm.
because that really builds relationships. But if we switch that and said, "Shane, I'm not sure if I understand completely where you're going with that idea. Can you start over again and explain to me what the idea is, how it builds on where we've been and where we're going? I really want to understand." And that entree, that willingness to show empathy and perspective taking does so much to bring the heat down in the room. Then you can listen for opportunities and overlapping interests and right ways of moving forward. But sometimes people underestimate the value of listening just to show the other person that you care. And that, again, that can take that really, that really intense emotion and kind of like, oh, you're hearing me. Okay. All right. Well, then let's proceed.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, goodness, there could be a whole nother episode on empathy alone. Episodes, plural. It's like it's yeah, it's empathy is like water on a fire. It just kind of brings the temperature down, like what you mentioned, and it's the exact opposite of our natural reflex when we're being threatened or attacked, or in some cases, hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but humiliated in front of people who you respect and love. And those are real. Like that happens. Um, but your response to those, it's everything. But to leverage them or for them to be real and for you to act on them, you have to know them
So
first.
absolutely. So one little example that I've used in my class that gets at this, in fact, I used two or three before because this one is harder. And it gets at not only empathy, but it also gets at assertiveness and how we deal with difficult situations. And so the example is this. Imagine that you are presenting a project that you worked on and your boss is in the room, but the presentation is to your boss's boss. And midway through the presentation, your boss effectively takes over. What would you do? And of course, there's no right answer to this, but these answers reflect people's comfort with that kind of not only conflict, but power asymmetry. And one of the key points that I try to raise is, I get when people say, well, I do nothing and, the boss finishes it and I just kind of walk tail between my legs back to my office. Right. But what happens in the future? If you say nothing when your boss does that, you basically say, it's okay, keep doing it. I don't mind. And so you have to find a way to communicate. I'm not okay with this, number one, but also number two, what's something that we could do differently in the future? Should we do a dry run of the presentation so that if there are issues, we can correct them before we go live? This way, we are both representing ourselves best. But again, I can't tell you how many times that specific example, the vast majority of participants in my programs would be like, just let them do it.
Yeah, that's the easy way out though.
You're right.
And it's the easy way out. And also, I so an observation of what you just shared of an actual, like, okay, I encourage people to rewind 15 seconds and go listen or write down what Suzanne just said. Um, or pause this and just jot down these notes of what's being shared. So you did something really interesting there that I feel in consulting and coaching and even just myself and colleagues is that you included the other side in the victory. You didn't say that way in order I can look great next time or I can look good. You said so we can look our best. And I love that. I love that because you have like that is influence. That is persuasion. It's not hard nosed like the Hollywood movies. It's actually like more of a dance and it's more of a care.
100%. And like one of my earliest memories as a consultant in the aerospace industry, we used to call empowerment the E word, I think partly because it was uncomfortable, right? So for a lot of managers in their minds, oh yeah, empowerment makes sense. It's like a nicer way than delegating or, or something like that. But I'm like, no, it's more meaningful that. It's more meaningful than that. Excuse me. It's how do you not only ensure buy-in, but let's face it, the level of work that you do, the strategy that you focus on, as opposed to the day-to-day little things, you're not focused on the things that are happening down there. And if your employee down here has an idea for making work better, interacting with the customers more effectively, ensuring that there are fewer mistakes and higher quality, listen to what they say. Their worldview is different from yours, and that's a good thing. I can't tell you how many times when I talk about empowerment in the classroom, I have again these young students who go, ooh, I'm going to school to get my degree so I can have power and tell people what to do. And I'm like, let me know how that works for you. And then of course I turn it around and say, how many of you have had a boss who has micromanaged you? All their hands go up and they kind of like, ah. And I'm like, how does that feel? Don't be that person. But
Yeah.
it requires that vulnerability, it requires that trust, it requires that willingness to accept that even though you're older and maybe more degreed, that you don't know it all. And again, as we started earlier in this talk, with technology changing so quickly and the nature of what work looks like changing so quickly, how could any manager, no matter how smart, have all the answers on everything?
No, in fact, wouldn't you want to work for a manager who's willing to admit that they don't have all the answers, and that's why they're working with you? They want to empower you to find the answers. It's like giving the answers away is actually a hurtful thing in management at certain times because it's the process of figuring out the answer where the growth is. So that way, maybe one day they can have your role as you move up, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
100%. But again, that kind of requires a manager who is comfortable in their own skin and willing to accept that they don't have all the answers. And
yeah.
not every leader possesses that trait.
Yeah, 100%. And so, as we just in the last couple minutes, you mentioned technology a second ago. In your classes, are you guys using AI in as it relates to negotiation, or is there any sort of technology integration? What's that been like for you, and what's your take
Sure.
on it?
So far, if I'm being honest, the most technology plays a role in my classes is when there is a negotiation simulation, and in particular, if the class is hybrid or if it's online, I not only ensure that the students are doing their negotiation on Zoom or Teams, but I ask them to record it because there's no better teacher than going back and looking at your behaviors, your spoken, your unspoken communication, which we know is 93% versus the words, to learn and to reflect, because that's another thing that I think is so important for learning is reflecting what went well, what didn't, what would I do differently next time. Where I haven't gone, Shane, full admission, is in the space of AI, and someone that we both know is going to help me in a current executive program that I'm teaching as we speak, do a little guest spot on that, because I'm going to be just as much a student as my participants in the EFBA program. So I admit my weakness here. I'm not there yet, but I
Yes.
do plan to learn.
Yeah, no, that's so great. No, and that's okay because everyone is figuring it out and everyone is doing their best. And it's funny, like as you, I'm really intrigued to hear your thoughts after that session because what I've found so far and been experimenting with ChatGPT and AI as it relates to negotiation is it makes the process a lot less restricted. It actually makes the process of preparing and getting ready, if leveraged correctly, can be really powerful. Just for example, just this past week, I built a GPT within ChatGPT. So like it's like an app in the App Store, and but much easier. Anyone can do it. You can create a GPT. Anyone can do it, and it's for MBA students specifically who are negotiating their salaries. And so it's
Nice.
programmed with documents from the web that I've
Hmm.
pulled and uploaded specifically for MBAs to negotiate. So you have like Harvard's approach, MIT's approach, all these different approaches to
That's
negotiation
brilliant.
for MBAs in there. And so this is like just the beginning, but I love that you're open-minded to figuring out creative ways to do it. So you got to keep me posted on what you guys land on. And of course, follow Suzanne on LinkedIn. Her link is in the show notes here. So just click the bio and then shoot her a message or give her a follow so you guys can stay connected. Suzanne, going forward, like um, I know people can find you on LinkedIn, but what are you most looking forward to about the rest of this year and uh, and everything that you're coming into?
So, one of the things that I've been working on a lot for the last 6 years or so is gender in negotiation. And when I first came to my previous institution, they did a lot of things. Exec ed wasn't really one of them. And I thought, I have this background. I was at IMD for several years in Switzerland, which is almost all exec ed. And I thought, there are the Harvards, the Northwesterns, et cetera, and their negotiation programs, but I didn't see a single program that was women only. And the reason I thought that was important, well, comes from the research that the way women are socialized causes them to ask for less, not speak up for fear of being rejected or worse, being called the B word, right? And so I've read a lot of the research. I've been doing my own research and I've been running programs for corporations because half of the workforce is female. And if women are not comfortable speaking up, representing themselves, their groups, the contracts department, et cetera, it's going to hurt not just them, but the whole department. So it's not just about salary. I don't talk about salary, but how do you represent the interests of your department? But the thing that has, in addition to that, Shane, and I'm ongoing research in there, I started realizing, and I have twins, I have boy-girl twins, and I'm like, girls become women. And if we don't start changing the narrative that girls hear about what is and isn't appropriate and how they speak out or speak up, of course they're going to come into the workforce with that same idea. And so I've done a couple of workshops with high school girls, and it's been really phenomenal on both ends. And a quick story, if I may, it'd probably take me about 1 minute. I did this workshop, 90 minutes, little lecture at first, hands-on simulation, some debrief. And then at the end, this one girl, maybe 17, asks, I need your advice, in front of the 100 other girls. She takes the mic. And I said, sure, shoot. And she says, this past weekend, I babysat for a family and they forgot to pay me. And I'm thinking, best case scenario, miscommunication between mom and dad. There are other more sinister explanations, but we'll keep those off for the moment. She continues, Shane. She then says, I really want to call them and ask them for the money they owe me, but I'm afraid they won't like me and won't ask me back. What's going to, chills still when I tell that story. What's going to stop that young girl from, her mindset at 17 being a 27-year-old, not pushing back on a colleague who has sexually harassed her? What's going to stop her from dealing with a vendor who says, no, we can't commit to that. Sorry. That's going to cause a whole ripple effect of problems down the line for her company. So I like working in places where I can have impact. So whether it's women or girls, and of course, all genders, but in particular, women face difficulties because of how they've been socialized.
Wow. That's a great story. And there's more to come. I know there's more to come. But appreciate you so much for coming on, Suzanne. So yeah, take an idea of what Suzanne said today of negotiating for your future and apply it to your life, or maybe taking a tangential idea to what was shared and apply it to your life and see what could change. And we'll catch you in the next episode. See you, everyone.